Hi, I'm Lauren Finley Jacob.
Hi, I'm Dane Story.
And together we co-host the Of Common Clay podcast.
I'm a filmmaker, writer, backyard gardener, and permaculture enthusiast.
And I'm an ethnobotanist, an herbalist, a women's spirituality scholar, and a proud chicken mom.
And together we love talking about all these things and more, and finding ways to deepen our connection to the earth, to regenerative ways of healing and tending the land and feeding communities so that together we can live in abundance and of health and excellent food and more fun and more play and creativity in our lives.
We're really fascinated with myth and story and the intersections of food, health, wellness, medicine, and what these ancient teachings can bring into our future.
Thank you very much for being here, and welcome again to the Of Common Clay podcast. This is what I see happening in the world now, is this othering of a conversation about health that has long existed, though, which is why I wish I had taken this up more in filmmaking and just day-to-day life and conversations before this moment. But here we are. And so I've always looked at diet and exercise and sleep as the most important things, and hydration and water and as the most important things to supporting your health, and that that sickness is also normal, and that especially flu, cold-like symptoms, fevers, and
this quote-unquote natural immunity is something people are making up. That what it makes it seem like, okay, no one's born naturally innately immune to COVID-19. Of course you're not. According to them, it's new and never existed, so none of us would have been able to be immune to it.
Right.
That is so it's just so degrading of what natural immunity actually is. It's a process in your body. And actually, what the whole vaccine industry is doing is trying to artificially mimic what the natural immune process in the body is.
Trying to.
The whole ideology behind vaccinations is built on what we think we know about our body's own way of handling itself in instances of, what would you even say? I was going to say attack, but I really hate the war-based mentality.
They say infection.
Infection, right, infection. Have anything else in our first kind of intro episode, or do you want to start talking about natural immunity?
Maybe we can. I can.
Are you ready to talk about that today or no?
Yeah.
I kind of have to pee.
We can always see how it goes. Go then.
Okay.
Got it good, now get inside.
We're going to go where everybody knows everybody.
All right, so should we get into it?
Yeah, we should definitely get into it. I feel like we've been, tiptoeing around
an actual
getting
topic.
deeper into what we actually have experienced ourselves with health and what we think, and bringing some other so-called experts that share our philosophy a little bit into the conversation on health. So what do we got?
Okay, so you originally posted this post on your stories, a repost.
Right.
And then I saw it and I got really upset.
Yeah.
And so for context, the actress, right, Rosario Dawson,
Right.
She reposted this from someone else.
Right.
She has a lot of followers, so this thing got a lot of traction. And we can get into my response of it later, but I thought as a starting point, we could just read the post.
Yeah. I just real quick, like, I came across it because it was getting traction. I forget who. I didn't follow the person, Farmer Rishi. I think his Instagram handle is. I didn't follow him at that point in time. So it came into my awareness because a friend or somebody I follow had shared it, and yeah, I had a similar reaction. It just kind of triggered some thoughts and feelings in me that I think I probably editorialized my thoughts in the moment, but it would be good to kind of reevaluate them now. And anyway, go ahead. Read us the post.
Okay,
please.
yeah, I'm gonna read it because I have a lot to say about this topic. Okay, so this post, and no shade to Farmer Rishi. You can
Right.
have your own opinion. We'll get into this.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
But I very strongly disagree with him. So here we go.
Same.
Natural immunity does not exist. This is our clickbaity title. All right. I'm writing this piece because I know many of my followers are vaccine skeptics or anti-vaccine. There's an extremely large overlap between the gardening wellness community and the anti-vaccine community, and I want to address this issue publicly. First, some acknowledgements. Western medicine and the American medical system do not do a great job at keeping people healthy. The American medical system, in many cases, profits off of sick people. Much of Western medicine is actually stolen indigenous medical knowledge. Much of Western medical innovation, in quotations, came through the torture and murder of people of color, especially Black, Latinx, and Jewish people. I also acknowledge many of the people, doctors, nurses, practitioners, in the American medical system genuinely care and do their best to help people heal. Western medicine is really good at emergency medicine, e.g. keeping you from dying because of its roots in war. Western medicine is good at addressing issues with single causes such as bacterial infections and viruses. Vaccines have been really good at preventing millions of early deaths since they began to be widely used in the last several decades. Now back to natural immunity in quotation marks, as if it doesn't exist by definition from the, sorry, that was a side note. Let me stick to the real post. Come on, Lauren, okay.
It's okay.
Now back to quote, natural immunity, unquote. No one is born innately immune to COVID-19. Immunity for most infectious disease is inherited or acquired. Some immunity you inherit from your mother's breast. Some immunity you acquire from exposure to virus. Some immunity you acquire from a vaccine. Your mother's breast, a virus, someone sneezes into your face, and vaccines all come from Earth. One is not, quote, more natural, unquote, than the other because nature does not exist. This refers to a previous post. Vaccines just give your body practice with a weakened or toothless opponent before going into battle. Going to battle against an opponent you've never seen before and without practice is generally a silly idea. It is possible for the American medical system to be terrible in many ways and have successfully developed a vaccine that prevents injury and death from the coronavirus. Both things can be true at the same time. It is also possible that foods recommended by, quote, natural living, unquote, advocates, such as sauerkraut, kefir, I don't know how to pronounce this, but kvass, I don't know, trace minerals, alkaline water, etc., do boost your immune system. Eat these foods if they feel good for you, and get the vaccine. Unless you have a true medical exemption, you can do both, really. And I don't think I'm going to read the rest. Do you want me to?
I
It's
don't
just
know.
stats, which
I mean,
I
we can
feel
maybe look at them together or something, because I mean, there's just a lot.
2.7 billion COVID vaccines have been administered. They are safe. I got mine in March. I'm not sick or dying. Bill Gates isn't reading my mind, though he can probably read my phone. The American medical system sucks in many ways and needs major reform. Let's do it after we've all received the vaccine. P.S. Vaccines were likely discovered by farmers in India and China as early as the 15th century AD. This PSA brought to you by someone who wants to hang out with you without a mask on.
There's just so much in that post, and the funny thing about it is the part that gets that it gets me kind of blood boiling a little bit, and just feels deeply problematic from my perspective of health and just trusting pharma is the I agree with almost every word of it, except for the headline, natural immunity does not exist, as a totalizing totalitarian statement of natural immunity does not exist. There's no nuance in that headline of this post, and the next two slides I think are very illuminating, because I think they're largely true, and he's speaking a lot of truth to the problems with Western medicine, that it's a sick care system, that it and these are things that I have pointed out to people frequently, but there seems to be this dead end specifically with vaccines. And if you've been vaccinated your whole life, and this is where story comes into it too, if you believe this story that vaccines save lives as just a given, then you're going to be a person who's predisposed to highly trust these vaccines, and somehow take this leap from, yes, big pharma and all the government institutions that are interconnected with them are highly corrupt and problematic and have poisoned people in the past, and their general mode of operation is profit and control and perpetuating sickness. There's no explanation of how you get from there to we should all inject ourselves with this brand new technology. There's just that's where it just always falls apart, no matter who you're talking to and no matter who you're listening to, whether you're listening to Dr. Anthony Fauci or Farmer Ricci or your local health department or a newscaster, whoever it is, or a celebrity, whoever it is advocating for the vaccine, it always just falls back on these very simple catchphrases. This vaccine is safe and effective. I had it a couple months ago and I'm not dead. That shouldn't be a reason to go tell everybody to get injected with something.
Well, yeah, you're not everybody.
Right.
It's a poor stance and argument. But on that note, though, a lot of people are harmed and some people aren't harmed. So, it's important to hear that both exist. That's not the point we're trying to make here. We're trying to say, just because it works for you doesn't mean you should bully other people into your choice because you don't have their body. I also, as the first thing I'll say, since you were talking specifically about vaccines, in this post, he says vaccines just give your body practice with a weakened or toothless opponent before going into battle. And I think a really important point is maybe that's how people have conceptualized past vaccines have worked. We have this idea that, you just take a vial of a dead or weakened virus, shoot that into your body, and your body reacts to it. That's not true, first of all, because if you just shoot it in your body doesn't do anything. You have to put an immune stimulating compound of some sort into it. That's where the adjuvants come in, that irritates your immune system so bad that it provokes a response out of your immune system to then fight or respond to this other thing that's connected to it. we'll save that topic for another day because I would want to do that justice.
Yeah, we'll get deep into the history of vaccines because people love to casually mention the history of vaccines working, but don't seem to really have, maybe some have, but most people who go there don't seem to really have followed the actual history of vaccine experimentation in humans and animals, because it's very appalling when you actually look at the ways they've experimented with vaccines on animals and humans and drawn conclusions that are positive for the vaccinations based on those experiments. Anyway, sorry.
So anyways,
continue.
in relation to this post though, that is a different type of technology that's being used. And if you're making a post about a COVID vaccine, that's not what's happening. You're not taking, first of all, there's no dead viruses because all viruses are dead. If we want to get into the semantics, which that might not be, where we want to reside right now, but viruses aren't living things. Okay, so from what we even know in a biological, we've agreed upon in standard biology. Okay, so these vaccines aren't putting a virus into your body for you to respond to this virus. It's completely different technology. So throwing this in here is already wrong. I think what people try to support this moment with is like, oh, well, we've used vaccines forever, they're safe. This is new. This is why a lot of people are really hesitant. People that have had every other vaccine, that have vaccinated their children with the ridiculous schedule of current vaccines. Right. This one is brand new. And for some reason, they're trying to minimize that or pretend that that's not real.
Absolutely.
That's real.
It always gets reflected that they've been researching it for 20 years or something, which
they failed every time
isn't that long.
To make a vaccine for humans with this technology.
The reason it just got rushed into production and mass distribution is because there was this claim that there was no other way to fight this brand new disease and virus, so we had to emergency authorize production and then release of these things into the public before any long-term any sort of studies were conducted on human populations for any period of time. And yeah, it always, this part is important, I think, because I've had conversations with people who are pro-vaccine and pro-mandate and pro-everybody getting them, that love to play on this idea that this vaccine can be trusted because it's just trying to do in the body what previous vaccines tried to do in the body. It's trying to create this downstream effect of antibodies to fight the virus in your body. But the mechanisms for creating it, for the ingredients that go into it, the kind of very loose knowledge by, at least as far as the broader, even scientific community, but certainly the broader public at large, as exactly how are they creating these mRNA and DNA viral vector vaccines in the case of the Johnson & Johnson one, how exactly, and that aside, I mean, that should be red flag number one, is just the lack of transparency and the short-term testing. But it all comes down to, at the end of the day, what your health philosophy is. And if it's rooted in not trusting the pharmaceutical systems as this post starts out, then you should be allowed to also choose not. If that vaccine is right for you, then you take it, go ahead, if that settles right for you. But I think you read a part in that post that was like, he recommended some natural remedies, and if it feels good for your body, you should take these things. But there's no mention of that with the vaccine. It's just, this technology has maybe sort of worked in the past, even though this isn't that at all, as we've just gone over. But you should just take this thing because vaccines work, is essentially seems like the argument that keeps getting repeated and is very rooted in this denial of our body's ability to heal on its own, and for us to be able to have our own agency in that healing by just taking care of our bodies in a very holistic and loving and calm way. And it's great if you, and like you pointed out nicely earlier, that's not easy for a lot of people. So like, you know, I'm speaking about this from a great place of privilege in so many ways, just the knowing of that I can overcome the flu or a cold by just resting and fasting and hydrating and meditating on getting better and healing my body, and trusting my body to know what it needs when it needs it. And that soups and broths are very good in the recovery of a cold or a flu or an illness, and that the relationship and the disconnection we have with this ability of our bodies, that lack of trust in ourselves to be able to heal, and the lack of trust in the natural world to support our healing. But that lack of trust is very, like, I understand why people say and feel the way somebody like Farmer Rishi does, because our dominant world, even if you are, he calls out the farming and wellness community for being typically anti-vaxxers because they lean into the first part of your post, the part that suggests that colonization and the destruction of indigenous ways and the co-opting of those by these very mechanisms that are making this new experimental technology are trying to force their way of being in the world upon all of us, and that should just be inherently problematic, I would think, for everybody. You know, no matter what you feel about health, we should be able to come to a deeper understanding that people should be allowed to have autonomy over their own bodies, and what goes into them and how they take care of themselves and what kind of community and wellness support system they want to build around that. And I'm excited to do more of those things with you and talk about more of those things with you on the podcast and beyond. Sorry, I kind of went on and on there, but do you have any other thoughts on the post?
Oh yeah, a lot. So I think from slide number 1, I think it's important to start talking about this from like a more meta philosophical perspective, because clearly what this individual is trying to do is be part of this debate of nature doesn't exist. Like, he has another post talking about how there's no nature, okay? And this is rooted in a perspective that I think can that can go both ways. Yeah, that can go both ways. So if you're trying to stake a claim that there's no differentiation between us, there's different ways you can say it. This person decides to say, we are one and the same with this phenomenon we call nature, so therefore nature doesn't exist. But another way you can say that same thing is, we are indistinguishable from this thing that we currently call nature. We are nature. Nature does exist and we are that. And I think that's where most people plant themselves. I think it's like kind of extreme to go the opposite way. But, you know, honestly, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's still an argument. I think it's really clickbaity myself.
Yeah.
But I think it's more harmful to say that, because what happens when you go that way versus this other way is you separate yourself from what we already preconceive of as the natural world even further. It like diminishes its value even further, instead of saying, no, we are part of this thing, and therefore our worth is equivalent. Like rivers, rocks, trees, forests, deserts, clouds, rain. We're part of that, and thus it should have the same value we do. But when you say the opposite, nature doesn't exist, it's so, I feel, belittling. It's to say that, like, And on the other hand, though, like, I agree that everything is part of nature, and there's a lot of philosophical thoughts that get into that, that, like, the sacredness of a garbage can on an urban street is, like, it has its own agency and uniqueness and energy, as does, a chair, as does a tree, as does a rock, as does on and on and on. Which, that is not something in this post that I'm disagreeing with. But I think it's important to contextualize it in this way, that there's many ways to say that same thing. And this is blatantly wrong. Natural immunity does exist.
Yes.
If you want to bring in this, well, nature's not real, so nothing's real, la 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 la. This is not the time and place for you to start saying natural immunity does not exist in the same type of reasoning where you're saying vaccine immunity does exist.
Right.
I think that's the flaw.
Well, it's the universe is hypocritical and contradictory, and so thus we are as humans. And when we when we do things by, slide posts on Instagram, we're always going to have it's going to be a place that is just the seed or the spark for ideas and thoughts and conversation. And so I think in recognizing that for whatever you put out there as an individual, and then also what we see reflected back from us from people we either deeply agree with or deeply disagree with. And on this post, there's a lot of common ground between the way we both feel about the world, I think, and things he says. But the first slide, natural immunity does not exist, is piggybacking on another post he made that says nature doesn't exist. Just you put it beautifully, that the opposite way to look at that is that everything is nature, and it is all interconnected, and it does include things humans make: vaccines, garbage cans, roads, cell phones, destructive things, war. All the things are part of nature, in the sense that if you believe that we are nature and nature is us. But to reduce the entire natural world to non-existence, to zero, I think is what allows for you to claim that vaccines are also nature, which is a contradiction to your whole premise that there is no nature, but yet this is natural. In thinking about a statement like nature does not exist and natural immunity does not exist, it opens the door for things that are further away from nature to be accepted as ways to progress or to appeal to better health. And there's so many things, I think, that we do as humans that you could consider part of nature that are actually an antithesis to us existing in a better, more connected, less separate, more coexisting world. And for me, it's really rooted in the story we tell ourselves about humans and about nature, and that in order to have progress in our dominant society and culture, we have to co-opt nature, and we have to compete with one another, and we have to compete with the natural world in order to extract more from it for wealth and comfort and safety and security. And I think those posts are really rooted in that story of the world, rather than a story of the world that is the antithesis to separating out human beings from one another, that I am deeply connected to you and you to me, not just because we're partners, but that every human is deeply connected to one another on this very cosmic and spiritual level. It also on a physical and energy level, and in just all of these ways that we are just scratching the surface of understanding, and there's a lot of people that are doing really cool work in the science world and philosophy that we love talking about, that we will bring into this conversation more. And the harm really is the harm in those ways of thinking, like, that allow for us to continuing to think we can just make one more vaccine that actually is not one vaccine, it's a schedule of ongoing vaccines into the future, and one more pharmaceutical drug, and one more oil drilling, and one more war to end all wars, and one more moonshot, cure-all, one-size-fits-all way of viewing the world, that doesn't allow for its beauty and interconnectivity to, like, really thrive and be seen, and that should be a story we try to focus on and imagine more for our future. That, like, not only, like, the idea is that we're all in this together, and that everything does have an effect on everything else, and the more we go into solutions to problems and big problems with war mentality, the more we just create more problems, and the separation and the othering of nature from humans allows us to really just go really hard and charge into a vaccine. And that's why a lot of people are taking this thing really quickly, because we're, I think, lost in a story of isolation and separation, and now they've put us deeper into that story in this time by saying we must isolate and separate from each other and not have direct conversations and not have open dialogue about what health means and what all these things mean and what's in the vaccine and what the long-term effects are. And I think a post like that does great disservice to it isn't trying to expand conversation around these things, even though we're now trying to expand the conversation based on reading this post, which I think is a healthy thing to do. But yeah, he doesn't seem interested in that himself. He's made a very calculated and clear decision on how he thinks about this.
Yeah, he did. And also, I will call this propaganda because there is a slide that says, and get the vaccine. So that's clearly a really poignant agenda to try to convince somebody on. And it's like, this is what my outcome is for you. So this is what I'm going to argue with up until here. You may have distrust in the Western medical community, but you should still get this vaccine. And if you happen to believe natural immunity exists, you're an idiot, is what it makes it sound like. So,
right.
Before we talk specifically about natural immunity, I just want to make one more point about this idea of, like, nature not existing, because it's like, when you start looking at ecofeminism, there's this whole, subsect of feminism that really looks at this kind of, I guess you would summarize it into, like, the one main conclusion that binds ecofeminism together is looking at the denigration of nature in the eyes of man and the denigration of women, both as subservient, subordinate positions, as being equated to each other. So nature is less than man. Man has dominion over nature. Man is superior to nature. Man superior to women. Women are inferior to man. Man dominates woman. And, whether or not you believe that, go read it yourself. Go look up, like, Val Plumwood. And, actually, Vandana Shiva is an ecofeminist. So there's a lot of brilliant minds within ecofeminism. I personally like it the most because it takes this gender division and kind of, like, intersectionality of, not just gender, but bringing kind of, like, all sorts of oppressions together, but also bringing the non-human into the realm of discussion. Mm-hmm. But this stance pretty much feels like almost being like, okay, well, nature doesn't exist, so it's man's world, and man makes vaccines, so that's inherently great. And that, for me, really borders this line of that same logic of ecofeminism. Your body's too dumb, we must override it with our big man brains.
Yeah.
Is what it really screams like to me. And there is no nuance or subtlety in here, because I mean, in discussing this post earlier, I mentioned this, but I think it's really important. Okay, just because like gas exists, you don't shove your veins up with that. Like, you don't go and drink fucking Freon, or like, you know, like there's a lot that exists. There's a lot in the plant world that exists that could kill you. You don't go pick oleander and shove it in your mouth. Like, you would die. There are natural toxins all over the place. Look at me, natural toxins. There are just toxins. Man-made, nature-made, evolved, whatever you want to call it. There's toxins, and that's real. Like, we all know that. Humans can die no matter what. Doesn't mean, though, that it's going to be okay to shove into your body. He goes on to say it's safe because he personally had no reactions to it. But, like, I think it's important to remember that nature exists. And we are part of that. That's my stance. That's what I stand by. We are nature. Nature is us, not the other way around. Not that we're in this black hole oblivion, nothing matters, whatever kind of perspective or mentality. Did you have anything else to say? Because I want to start talking about getting into like why natural immunity really does exist and why it's really, really, what is the word?
I don't know.
Besides harmful, it's extremely harmful to say that it does not exist. And that's kind of the whole point of this podcast episode, is to talk about the kind of like meta story of like, if we don't as a species acknowledge that natural immunity exists, we're fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. It comes to, yeah, let's talk about it. I mean, it comes to some of the things we've touched on already. Like, if we can't enter, this is what I see happening in the world now, is this othering of a conversation about health that has long existed, though, which is why, you know, I wish I had taken this up more in filmmaking and just day-to-day life and conversations before this moment. But here we are, and it really is like there's a call to people who have experienced these things throughout their life, some for less time than others, but now I'm 38, and from day one, my parents have never taken me to a medical doctor when I've got sick, not one time, not for anything. Okay, I take that back. I've been to a medical doctor other than a dentist for sprains and breaks in a finger a couple times, and one time when I was really young, like I had some like mealworms or something like that, and it was like persistent, and we went to the local clinic or whatever, and you know, those are like the only times I ever remember going to an allopathic Western medic, like a prescriber of pharmaceuticals doctor. Anyway, the point just being that they learned a lot about eating and about eating a balanced diet by studying macrobiotics in particular, but other health modalities. My mom was a masseuse for many, many years, and, you know, studied a little bit of, you know, Chinese medicine in her journey through other, like, learning about natural healing and the like, and they both, you know, put a lot of things together around the time that I was born. And so I've always looked at diet and exercise and sleep as the most important things, and hydration and water, and as the most important things to supporting your health, and that, you know, that sickness is also normal, and that especially flu, cold-like symptoms, fevers, and, you know, sore throats and coughs, and especially in our world of, you know, of human extraction from the earth, we know these ways of over extracting oil and gas and adding factory-made chemicals to soil system. We know that these things create poisons in our bodies that lead to flus and colds, but what I've learned from just living my life, and now I've learned a little more by following people like Dr. Bush and Dr. Cowan and other people that you've referred me to and conversations we've had directly, that like the body has this amazing innate ability to repair itself if you are able to find a balance and harmony in your diet and intake, and that goes to all sorts of things, like just the people you're surrounding yourself with and what kind of energies you're existing in on a day-to-day basis. And I think, do you want to jump in and say anything about natural health or
I just
natural immunity in particular?
Yeah, I just want to be really clear that natural immunity is a process that happens in your body that is not, it is not eating healthy. It is not inheriting something from your mother when you're born, although that can be an aspect of it, like he claims in this post. Like, this post tries to make it seem like this quote unquote natural immunity is something people are making up. That like, what it makes it seem like, okay, no one's born naturally innately immune to COVID-19. Like, of course you're not. According to them, it's new and never existed. So none of us would have been able to be immune to it.
Right.
That is so rude. Like, it's just so degrading of what natural immunity actually is. It's a process in your body. And actually, what the whole vaccine industry is doing is trying to artificially mimic what the natural immune process in the body is.
Trying to.
The way vaccines are made aren't making new things. We didn't invent a magical substance that we take in our own minds that make us healthier from these things. We do something to initiate a process and manipulate a process that the body naturally does. So first of all, the whole ideology behind vaccinations is built on what we think we know about our body's own way of handling itself in instances of, you know, what would you even say? I don't even. I was gonna say attack, but I really hate the war-based mentality.
They say infection.
Infection, right? Infection. But yeah, your body is like neutralizing things all the time with antibodies. Like, it doesn't have to just be like a virus, you know. So I just really wanted to. I have some stuff here about that I would really like to talk about, but you know, even like the WHO talks about natural immunity. They even have a whole document called COVID-19 natural immunity. And so to say that natural immunity doesn't exist is not only completely factually wrong, it's very harmful, because the implications of that statement are huge. If you don't think natural immunity exists and you're going to use that as an argument to propagandize people into taking a vaccine, I think that is like one of the most dangerous positions that we could be in, is if they being any political health figure, any political figurehead, any heads of now politically oriented health organizations, including all up to like medical curriculum, if you're going to start saying, and they've done things before where they change how things are taught, if you're going to start saying that vaccines are the only way to achieve immunity and that like a natural immune process doesn't exist, then we're all dead. Like, we're just all dead. Yeah. Like, if that is the foundation upon which we're going to start setting the discussion and the parameters upon which other knowledge is then dispersed or obtained or gained, then we're done.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's why I'm so impassioned when talking about these things and talking about the danger of the vaccines, the potential danger of the vaccines. Even I will qualify it, because we just don't know yet. We know they're dangerous. We know they have immediate and downstream negative effects, from blood clotting to brain aneurysms, to other just respiratory
Myocarditis
conditions
is the new
in
hot
death.
one.
Myocarditis is very popular in like terms of, and I say popular because it's actually being reported on a little bit in mainstream sources as a downstream side effect of these vaccines. That what gets me going nuts, and the reductiveness of this post, is that you can put out there that these things are experimental, and the language we use, I get how it's triggering to some people, but if we can't talk about that this is an experiment going on in real time, if we can't even talk about it from that basic starting place of reality, then and you're going to erase natural health as a way to heal from an infection, or to heal from really anything, it almost seems like now, then, and you're going to, and these stories are being told through the lens of highly vaccinated populations. The West is pretty vaccinated. So on into the future, they say around 70%, 60 to 70% now in the United States of the adult population is fully vaccinated. If we're going to continue to do this on into the future, and natural immunity doesn't exist, and so like that is even more and more marginalized in our way of doing things, then yeah, there's no way of knowing how harmful of a world we might be entering into, where ongoing vaccinations that we don't know what they're doing to people are just going to be our normal way of life going forward, and we can't even talk about natural health without being highly censored or highly demonized. And the thing about natural health is it doesn't coincide with and a vaccine, like his post tries to suggest. There's just way too much evidence that these things created by the pharmaceutical companies create more problems in the body over time that have to be tended to by that same philosophy
There's a whole subsect of like disease that literally, I forget what it's called. I read it earlier. It's a subsect of classification of disease that literally is caused by physician doing. Like the illnesses you develop are only known to be caused by pharmaceutical physician intervention. That alone is really freaky.
Yeah, that it's well known that medical error, that goes hand in hand with what you're saying right there, is one of the leading causes of death in America and in Western medicine scenarios.
Well, it's also why insurance exists.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
Doctors get sued all the time. Hospitals get sued all the time. That's also another debate people say is like, oh, these natural health people, like they got a suit put against them or something. It's like, yeah, like literally everyone has though.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not a good thing to say. Doctors are going to write in, I haven't had a suit brought against me, but it's very common. That's why you have to have like malpractice insurance, you know?
Right.
It's like a common thing.
It's just often a thing leveled against a doctor that favors natural health practice and holistic healing. They love throwing out that they've been sued as a reason to distrust them, when we love throwing out that Pfizer Pharmaceuticals has been sued and part of the biggest fraud payouts, and like it's like the suits against these small time doctors are like for like, you know, them usually something like one instance of, or a couple instances of them having a patient get a treatment that is not FDA approved or something like that. Whereas like these big pharmaceutical companies, like their fraud cases are paying off doctors to say certain things, paying off heads of health departments and regulatory bodies.
You know, whenever you're exposed to advertising in this country, you realize all over again that America's leading industry is still the manufacture, distribution, packaging, and marketing of bullshit. High-quality bullshit, world-class designer bullshit, to be sure. Hospital-tested, clinically proven bullshit, but bullshit nonetheless.
And this review, which was by a number of Harvard researchers, reveals a shift towards the FDA's use of, quote, less data to approve drugs and an escalating reliance on pharmaceutical industry payments to actually cover FDA salaries. Now, when it comes to an organization like the CDC, we have the example of Julie Gerberding, who was CDC director from 2002 to 2009 and then went on to become the head of Merck Vaccines. Is it common for CDC and FDA employees to use this kind of revolving door?
Well, there are many, there are revolving door problems with all of our federal agencies and all of our state agencies. There's a phenomena that is very well documented called agency capture. CDC is actually a vaccine company. CDC has a total budget of about $11 billion a year. It spends $5 billion of that buying vaccines from those 4 companies and making sweetheart deals.
Joining me now to discuss the big picture here, the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. Mr. Azar, thanks so much for joining this morning.
Glad to be with you, Jim. Thanks for having me.
If honesty was suddenly introduced into politics, it would throw everything off. The whole system would collapse. And I think deep down the American people know that. The American people like their bullshit out front, where they can get a good, strong whiff of it.
Now, thanks to Operation Warp Speed under the president, thanks to remdesivir, steroids, convalescent plasma, better treatment protocols, that has been reduced to well under 10%. And we literally are weeks to months away from next generation monoclonal antibody therapies that'll treat and prevent disease and vaccines that'll eventually get us out of this.
This is a short informational video put out by a third-party watchdog group in May of 2020, just as the pandemic story was unfolding. 2 months ago, the Trump administration announced Operation Warp Speed, or OWS, to accelerate the development of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. However, since its creation, OWS has funneled billions of taxpayer dollars into drug companies without transparency. The Trump administration has filled key positions with big pharma executives and lobbyists, like former Eli Lilly president and current HHS secretary Alex Azar. The Trump administration tapped former drug company executive Dr. Moncef Slaoui to be the program's top scientist. Dr. Slaoui has extensive ties to big pharma and was on the board of Moderna, a company recently selected as a vaccine finalist. We know how that played out. Dr. Slaoui and other OWS leaders were exempted from standard transparency and conflict of interest rules. At the time he was appointed, Dr. Slaoui held 155,000 shares in Moderna, worth over $10 million. At the time he was appointed, a company, Moderna, that had never made a product before. Moderna received $955 million in federal funding to develop a COVID-19 vaccine. And its executives have been cashing in on millions of dollars in stock since it was selected.
Not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction.
It's like you kind of need a whole course to talk about this stuff. I'm not even kidding. because when you start getting into natural immunity, it's like there's the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. There's like the first line defenses, and then there's like the reactionary defenses. But like your immune system begins kind of like in your mucous membranes across your whole body. In fact, that's where it's interesting when you start looking at microbiome research too, because your mucus can actually host a ton of microorganisms. So when we're talking about, you know, microbiome health, including gut health, but that starts in our nose, that whole tract, like nose to mouth to then throat to digestion all the way down to your gut. Our mucous membranes are like often completely overlooked, but very vital in the health of our bodies. And I think to have properly functioning mucous membranes, you also need to be a moist, hydrated individual. And we severely lack that. Like most humans are chronically dehydrated. And so that alone is like, I mean, just one tiny aspect of what the natural immune system is in kind of like innate versus adaptive immunity. But then within this, you have kind of like active and passive immunity. So like within natural immunity, there's like passive immunity where you're getting things like as an infant through your mother's breast milk or through her microbiome transfer. But then there's also active immunity, which is like an active body response. So there's different ways that the immune system's classified. But the fact that it exists is not false or magical thinking. Like it's very well documented. Like Google right now, or don't Google, we don't like them. Internet search right now. I forget what I was going to say. Oh, well, you can internet search the WHO, the World Health Organization, and natural immunity. Like it exists right now. Like I have a document even titled COVID-19 Natural Immunity. Within 4 weeks following infection, 90 to 99% of individuals infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus developed detectable neutralizing antibodies. And I think when that is like what is actually relevant and published in the world, to have a post saying that natural immunity doesn't exist, go get vaccinated, is so irresponsible. I can't even handle it.
Yeah.
It's like if you want to say follow the science, you know, those people, follow
Right.
the science. Okay, like let's not pretend natural immunity doesn't exist.
Yeah. It's interesting how the conversation just gets co-opted by a very selective way of thinking about things that are very complex and nuanced. Like when you start talking about you know, the way the microbiome is affected through our nasal passages as the first like line of that, it gets into all sorts of things that overlap between what is often like referred to as like a debate between germ theory and terrain theory, which I've posted lots about on social media and we'll talk about more. And I think that is really the central conversation around what natural immunity is or isn't, and whether or not we need any pharmaceutical interventions ever, or maybe just some. Or can we lean much more towards, this is where the germ theory and the terrain theory overlap, breathing air in diverse natural environments is thought of as a terrain theory kind of 101, you know, gold star for human health, is like getting diverse air microbiome into your system, getting into bodies of water, the ocean and natural lakes that are flowing and have energy and are clean. These things are supportive of our natural immune systems because they are direct engagements with the complex natural world and the microbiomes that we all live and breathe within. And this is where, like, you know, they say like you're more likely to get sick indoors, well, yeah, you are more likely to get sick if you spend long hours of time indoors and masked and in a artificial air-conditioned system without sunlight, sunlight being another key to, boosting your immune system, because like you were pointing out to me earlier, like there's not a lot of foods high in vitamin D, especially ones we eat on a regular basis as humans, and so the sunlight is where we get that from.
Well, and there's a huge correlation and well documented that people have looked at, doctors have looked at, not people, but doctors have looked at with vitamin D deficiencies and vitamin C, but vitamin D deficiencies strongly linked to poor COVID outcomes. And it makes sense. Vitamin D is super important for many of our body's processes. And when you take a more natural, realistic approach to health, most illnesses come from being dehydrated and being nutritionally void of certain things, we can talk more about that, I guess, but like, I think we underestimate even what like breathing well does in our entire bodies. And more we're creating societies where we don't have the time or space to even sit and breathe well. Like, I mean, we're sitting too long, we're stagnant. This is not an episode on how to be healthy in times of COVID per se, so we don't need to get into that. But I also, because we're saying natural immunity so much, just want to mention, people might love or hate this, but there was something published in Science, this online magazine, that cites to this, it's a published study, like observational study, but it has not been peer reviewed. So I'm sure some people are like really upset about that like you would be putting this out there. But what's peer reviewed these days? Everything's coming out like crazy. So, looking at an Israel population of individuals that have had, so they usually call it like COVID naive. So like, which is confusing, but it's like, so people who have never had contact with the virus, okay? They looked at people who never had contact, then were infected and had only natural immunity response because it's a real thing. Or were never in contact with the virus and then had a vaccine, and looked at over time like what their health outcomes were with like hospitalizations and then reinfection rates. And the consensus was basically that like probably, they argue because vaccine immunity has a tapering off point, which is why you need things like booster shots, and will indefinitely probably need booster shots. You, as a naturally immune person, will create antibodies for, with certain things, it's lifelong. We haven't lived a lifetime of COVID, so no one can scientifically validate that. But every length of time that they've looked at these studies, they've continued to find natural immune body responses and antibody production throughout the remainders of whatever studies there are. So if it's an 8-month study, they last 8 months. If it's longer than 8 months, they last longer than 8 months. And so when you're looking at, it's like always a risk to reward thing, right? That's what this main dominant discussion is like, okay, well, if you're in a category or group where there's relatively low risk and you consider yourself a healthy individual, natural immunity sounds pretty freaking sweet to me. If you're old or whatever and you've used pharmaceuticals your whole life and you have no ability to change your habits, no want to change your habits, even though you're going to have to anyways because you're going to have to wear a mask for the rest of your life or whatever, then maybe you take a vaccine. Like, I don't think anyone should be telling anybody else what to do, what it comes down to. I don't even want to even tell other people to not take a vaccine. I'm just saying I have been following these numbers from the very beginning, and I am very concerned that there has been no room for natural health to exist in this conversation. And I do herbalism, I practice herbalism. I have friends, luckily for me, a lot of my herbalist friends of many different herbal lineages are standing strong in the totality of their health practices. But there's been a lot of individuals within different alternative health practices that have completely thrown their ideologies out the window. They're like, yes, get vaccinated. Don't do any of this other stuff. Or they're also saying, yes, get vaccinated and do this to boost your immunity. But there's a lot of people that won't go into that universal, assimilative view of this is the only way a body can survive this. And then final point is just, there's been a lot of individuals like clearly saying, you know, from doctor communities saying that there could be huge health risks for people that have had a COVID bout, have had some sort of body response with measurable antibody production, and then to get a vaccine on top of that could be really harmful for them. It would provide no benefit to their body. It would only provide the risks associated with vaccination. So that's a huge topic that, I mean, people that I follow in social circles online that I'm a part of in natural health are talking about, but like, I don't think the dominant narrative is allowing that conversation to be had either. Even though people are winning court cases,
Right.
Suing because they've had natural immunity to be exempt from the mandate. So that's been happening in the news.
What that story illuminates for me, because I think we actually, maybe this is where we actually diverge a little bit from what even we think about COVID-19 and the whole story, which I think which is why I'm excited to continue talking about this subject with you and bringing in all these different perspectives, which I think at a base level is the important thing, and that's what sent so many red flags and alarms off in my head right away, is like there weren't allowed to be nuanced conversations even within people who agreed that we must lock down and wear masks and take things super seriously as precautionary measures, even though we haven't really studied this new virus and new disease yet because it's new. We must do all these things, so said a lot of people, but there seemed to be very little room for nuance even within that belief system. And the things you're bringing up, like the CDC's own page on COVID-19 and natural immunity, suggests that the science behind what virologists and epidemiologists think about COVID-19 itself is that if you've had it or had any contact with it, which is most people in the United States, if you believe the dominant COVID-19 narrative, you're going to have natural immunity or antibodies to this virus. And there's published scientific studies in prominent journals that suggest that like you're just saying, that having the vaccine is more dangerous to those, can be more dangerous, at least there's evidence that it can be more dangerous to those individuals. I depart from all of that though, and you know, because I was raised my whole life to believe that we don't catch colds or flus, which are also thought of as viral infections in the dominant allopathic medical, pharmaceutical, vaccinology world. We don't catch them from human to human contact. We create them in our own bodies. And there's all sorts of well-published science and natural health research and the like around the different ways these illnesses manifest in our bodies through poor food and environmental and lack of sleep and stressful work environments and society at large and all these things that come into play. And with COVID-19, I am in a very unique subgroup of people, but there are doctors and researchers and scientists that also are asking these very skeptical, but I think important questions about why we consider viral infections real in the way that we do in our dominant world. Why have we accepted that there is one virus that is causing this one disease when even the dominant narrative has never pretended that there's only one virus? There's from the get, and we're now calling them mutations and variations, but SARS-CoV-2 is merely but a mutation or variation of SARS and MERS and the tens of thousands now of recorded different viral genomes for this one virus. So if it doesn't have just one common origin, that even in the dominant conversation isn't agreed upon, did it come from lab, what do they call that?
Gain of function.
Gain of function research. One way or another? We know the story began at this coronavirus Wuhan research lab.
And when I realized that the laboratory was having the same name, first name and last name, of the evil that had been plaguing us, I thought to myself, that's up. And then they asked the scientists, they're like, how did this, so wait a minute, you work at the Wuhan respiratory coronavirus lab. How did this happen? And they're like, a pangolin kissed a turtle.
That was dedicated to studying coronaviruses and their mutations in the wild and in laboratory settings. And we know that this lab has worked on sequencing the SARS-CoV-2 genome, and it's out of that lab that they developed the initial assay for the PCR test. So to me, I don't believe that we humans have ever proven that a single virus causes a disease and that it passes from human to human and then causes illness in other people. I think that story we'll get into that in future podcasts, but I think that story falls apart really quickly, and I've witnessed it in real-time conversations, asking people to explain to me why they think or believe this is true. And so to me, it's not about whether or not it came out of a lab or they just did some experiments in that lab with samples from people in Wuhan and it actually came from nature, from a wet market, but we're actually not sure if it came from that wet market or who was actually a patient zero. But in the dominant scientific narrative of viruses, these things are all important questions that have yet to be answered. And so that's where I think that's why I want to explore some of these things in our podcast, but I hope we get into much deeper conversations about health and the future of humanity and our stories at large as well. But right now, this story is controlling so much of what we think, including having people present things that I think that we both agree though are very harmful, which is that the natural world is somehow a fiction, and that natural immunity is somehow, it needs almost like the argument seems to be that it almost needs to be erased so that we can accept these experimental saviors on into the future, because that's the only better way. And that just creates all sorts of problems with, what we might allow to be mandated and forced to be put into our body as a means of safety and health and control. I hope I kind of said that okay, because I do know that I have a very different perspective on infection and viral illness and the lack of observable story that makes sense to me anyway, as how we've concluded that viruses, and in this case one virus is causing this global pandemic. It falls apart real quick. Anyway.
Yeah. I'm sure our health perspectives will be more known the more we chat. Is there anything else about natural immunity you want to mention as a process?
Yeah, just I'll try to be real quick. Just that I think like this conversation has sparked a lot of things for a lot of people, and that I think it's just good that we talk about the body's ability to heal and death in general and illness, and normalize that getting sick is okay and it shouldn't be this thing to fear. COVID has turned like normal flu and cold symptoms and lots of people's perception of them into this thing like that might lead to your immediate demise, and like you should be very afraid. It's just a story that sounds very dangerous to me going forward. Creates a lot of division and isolation and anxiety, rather than like what I think we need to be happy and healthy. And natural immunity comes from our like the human experience of coexisting and coming together in actual live events that that we've kind of minimized in the last year and a half. And I fear that we will continue to divide and isolate and fear each other if we don't open up our minds and hearts to talk about like what we want to see in the world in the future, and natural health and access to health and care are important things, I think, to me. And so that's going to be a big focus of what we talk about. Anything more you want to share? Natural immunity or...
There's one part of that post that he talks about like how Western medicine rips off indigenous ideas, which is so true. In ethnobotany, one of the prominent jobs is called ethnopharmacology, where they literally want to ship you out to indigenous peoples and steal their medicine. So that's very real. And pharmacology was born out of creating synthetic components, compounds, that were of traditional plants for a long time. This isn't natural immunity. This is natural health discussion. But in here, this post, sorry, can't log in. They talk about how vaccines were likely discovered by farmers in India and China as early as the 15th century AD. And I want to just mention, I don't know what that is specifically referring to, but there are all of these wise folk remedies and ways of dealing with illness that have kept populations of humans alive for a really long time. And that did not just happen because of a vaccine that was created. And also, it's like things that we think of as like, oh, modern Western medicine like made this thing, like penicillin, for example. Like that was an old wise woman deal of how to heal people for a long time, which was like, you know, put a piece of moldy bread on a wound and it won't get infected because the penicillin's the mold on the bread, and that has to deal very acutely with cuts, scrapes, and stuff like that. There are so many beautiful ways of reconnecting with that line of thought, and the reason a lot of this medicine has kind of exploded in the way that it does is because of its scalability and mass way of making it, you know? And so for penicillin, for example, it's like because it was wartime and they needed to like treat all of these wounds all at once to be able to manufacture in mass this thing, rather than in the average home, the average household being able to slap a moldy bread on your leg. Like, scale and context is really important in like kind of these discussions, but that doesn't make a piece of moldy bread any less potent in certain circumstances. And I think that's kind of a little anecdote I'd just like to throw in there, is like in kind of today's day and age, if you were raised in the Western medical institution or with over-the-counter pharmaceutical things, then you might not even have ever realized that there's actually like a plant-based alternative that works way better than the thing that you've been taking your whole life, because you've never stepped into that world. And so, it's like, and then the other thing is just like, there are so many things I think we don't understand. And there are things that I understand only because of specific lineages of thought, like how we perceive the immune system to work. There's other things that I understand from experiential knowledge. And then, there's other things that I understand because I'm taking my own best guess based on everything that I've read and synthesized and my experiential knowledge. And for me, that ends up being my own unique view and philosophy on health. So I think you and I both have unique philosophies on health. It'll be fun to dive more into those and really explore not the natural immunity process in the body per se, although maybe we should put something out online really outlining what that process looks like in a detailed way that's not just in a conversation, and put some links up for people to check that out too, because if you want to know how your body actually works, I think it's kind of empowering. But yeah, just I'm excited to do a few more a few more sessions, podcasts, episodes on.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
On all things health and bringing us together and bringing us back to the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of common clay. Yeah, you just inspired, like, I just think that we're called to do this right now for lots of reasons that we've kind of put out there. And a big thing for me is to really focus on story and storytelling and how that has inspired me. And, how stories really do affect the way we perceive reality in the real world. And that, like, we did a heavy amount of, like, kind of criticizing this post in a way, but I just also want to make sure that, I think it's really important right now more than ever to really speak the world we want to see into existence. And so finding ways to focus on stories and practices and learning teachings from different people, like you just described, all the ways like you've assimilated your viewpoint on the world, and bouncing those things off of each other in this format will be fun, and bringing in other perspectives and maybe having guests who share our perspectives in some ways, but also like have nuanced different ways of thinking about the world, and that through these conversations we can sort of imagine a world where more people have really powerful access to healing food, land, air, water, and just communal support to achieve those things, and that we can normalize all these things as ways of being healthy and promoting natural immunity, meditation and breathing and just having fun and encouraging play. And that's all I got. Okay.
I just would like to note that the post Rosario Dawson posted was taken down, so if anyone tries to look for it, that one was removed. And then a lot of like over-counter medications that people use for things like even cold and flu to just suppress it, it's really put us in a place where people have lost this lineage of knowing how to even encourage the body to sweat, to assist a fever, not suppress a fever, to, coat and support your mucus lining so your cough is productive instead of like lingering for months at a time. Like there's all these really simple home remedy, folk remedy things that up until very recently, sometimes sometimes it carries on. You know, your parents might know these things, they might not. Your grandparents might know these things, they might not. And then from there, but I think like learning and empowering yourself, this knowledge is out there. This is the thing that's really interesting and also frustrating, is like, it's not lost knowledge. It's there somewhere. Certain things may have been lost, but depending on how you believe knowledge can be accessed or gained, it's available, you know, and people are more than willing to share plant remedies. Like, it brings people joy, has been my experience. People of all places and times and, you know, shapes and sizes and colors and thoughts and ideologies. There's something about the deep connection that people have with plants that make you want to love them and share them with other people. And the same thing goes with those remedies. It's like a way of caring for others is how you care for yourself in some instances. So these are things that can be reclaimed, and that can be, we can use them. We can use natural remedies to support ourselves on a daily basis, on an acute crisis basis, and onward. And there's some really brilliant people already coming up with great protocols. One of my friends who studies Chinese medicine likes to say, you know, Chinese medicine survived like probably like, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of pandemics, you know, because they're not obsessed with what's happening. They're looking qualitatively at the energies of the body and treating each thing as it comes in that unique person at that unique time, and being fully present with everyone, not like putting everyone into one tiny box and saying this is the thing and how it's going to present in everybody, and, you know, whatever. It'll be very different time-wise, sensitivity-wise, all these things per person, no matter what it is, no matter what the reason, you know, like whether it's a virus or a toxin or whatever you want to call it semantically, or your microbiome's out of balance, or, you know, like learning how the body stays in homeostasis, how the body communicates, and how energy kind of moves in the body are, I think very well known and very well documented, that has a history of thousands of years of use behind it. The exact plants might be different depending on what region you were born in, but all human bodies act the same. And a lot of plants have similar uses across the globe for different issues and ailments. Like, plants are not only this one plant in this one part of the world will heal this one thing. That's just not how plants work. There's often a huge overlap of different plants and uses of plants. And humans have used plants for millennia, and those plants have been migrated and traded and dug up and transported and brought to new homes. Like, plants are this thing that are not just food or medicine, but they're a sense of security and comfort, and it's really a sense of relationship we have with these plants. It's like almost instantaneous. If you go to a landscape and see plants you're familiar with, if you're the type of person who takes notice, you know, in modern society, many people haven't been raised to appreciate plants, so they have what they call like, they call it, you know, kind of like the green blur or something, where you just like look at a forest and can't tell what anything is. But a lot of people are not like that. When you have a deep affinity to plants, it's like when you see one, you'll feel it in your body, you know? Like, you'll see a rose and remember, oh man, that reminds me of my grandmother's garden, the smell of it, what she used to do with it, all of that stuff. It's deeply personal to us, in the same way that food is, in the same way that medicine is. And I think when we talk about care also, because we were talking a lot about natural immunity, natural health, but what you and I care about really is like care-centered communities, because it implies this insertion of relationship. It's like whether it's relationship for caring over land, or relationship of caring over each other as humans, or human to non-human animal, or human to plant, like that is kind of the epitome of what the future of what health is, we believe should look like, is really care-centered. But plants are, you can't take plants out of that. I could see pharmaceuticals going away forever, but you can never take plants out of that. Like, we're 100% completely dependent on plants. We just are. It's what we eat. It's what we heal with. It's what we build with. It's like, it's so much of the whole world around us. So I hope we can bring more plant love and life into this discussion. And with that note, peace out. Sponsor us if you want.
Good one. All right. Is that it?
I think so. I think I've hit my max sitting in this chair.
All right, let's call it a day then.
Should we do a mugs cheers for like B-roll?
Sure.
Okay. Hey Dane, where can the people find us on the internet?
You can find us on Instagram or YouTube at Of Common Clay.
And if you feel so inclined, you can support us on our Patreon page, also Of Common Clay.
This podcast was recorded on illegally occupied Kanaka Maoli land, otherwise known as Kailua Oahu.